Damien the Wraith, Calder ruled Liverpool's streets with a ghostly hand. Sienna Red Fox, Morley challenged his every move, and Elias Thorne waited silently, ready to betray them both. This is the story of how a northern city became a battleground for drug lords, where loyalty was rare, violence was inevitable, and one wrong move could cost a life. Liverpool, a city celebrated for its musical legends and its historic docks, had another, far darker side that few outsiders ever saw. Beneath the hum of daily life, the streets were being quietly claimed by men and women who thrived in the shadows, and at the center of this growing underworld was a man who became a ghostly figure of fear. Damien, the Wraith Calder. His rise to power wasn't sudden, but once it happened, it reshaped the city's criminal landscape in ways no one could have predicted. Calder was a master at blending into the background, leaving no trace of himself, yet his influence stretched through every dock, street corner and alleyway of Liverpool. His empire began modestly, with small, seemingly insignificant shipments that were easily concealed within the labyrinth of containers flowing in and out of the port. At first these were whispered about only in the underground circles, rumors of a mysterious operator who could make problems vanish overnight. But Calder's ambition was much greater than smuggling a few kilos of cocaine or heroin. He envisioned Liverpool as a northern stronghold for the international drug trade, a hub that would connect the UK directly to the global cartels. What most didn't realize was that Calder already had connections in Colombia, a link that allowed him to orchestrate shipments on a scale that rivaled some of London's most notorious gangs. The docks were his playground and his weapon. He knew the routines of customs officers, the timing of shipping schedules, the blind spots of surveillance cameras. To him, a container stacked with coffee or electronics could conceal hundreds of kilos of narcotics, moving unseen beneath the surface of legitimate trade. But it wasn't just about smuggling, it was about sending a message. Calder wanted everyone to know that Liverpool was no longer just a port city. It was a city under his control. The first neighborhoods to feel his presence were Vauxhall and Everton. Streets that once hummed with everyday life began to show signs of a different rhythm. Cars would disappear overnight. Alleys that had been quiet for decades became the site of mysterious confrontations, and families who had lived there for generations suddenly feared leaving their homes after dark. Rumors of disappearances and sudden, unexplained deaths circulated quickly, and although no one could directly link them to Calder, everyone knew better than to question it. His reputation alone kept the streets in line, despite the fear he inspired. Calder was a calculated figure, not a chaotic one. He understood the importance of loyalty, even when it was enforced through intimidation. He surrounded himself with a small circle of trusted lieutenants who handled day-to-day operations, leaving Calder free to manage the bigger picture. Surveillance tapes later recovered by investigators would reveal how methodical his approach was. Every shipment, every deal, every move had been planned with precision. His people were instructed to blend into the city, appearing as ordinary street dealers or logistics workers, so the empire could expand quietly, unnoticed by the authorities. But even as he expanded, Calder remained a phantom to most. Neighbors would catch glimpses of luxury cars parked incongruously in the streets, or hear rumors of large sums of cash changing hands, yet the man himself remained invisible. It wasn't just his physical elusiveness that defined him, it was the fear he cultivated. The name the Wraith became a whispered warning in pubs, on street corners, and among young people tempted to join the drug trade. To challenge Calder was not merely dangerous, it was unthinkable. By the time investigators began to piece together his operation, the city had already changed. Liverpool's northern neighborhoods had become a chessboard of influence, with Calder as the unseen king. And while the authorities scrambled to understand the scope of his network, it became clear that this was only the beginning. The Wraith's reach extended far beyond Liverpool, hinting at a connection to a cartel in Medellin that would ultimately reveal how the quiet city on the Mersey had become a key player in a global war over narcotics. As Damien Calder consolidated his control over Liverpool's docks and streets, it became clear that no empire could grow without rivals. The first serious challenge came in the form of Sienna Red Fox Morley, a figure who operated on the opposite side of the city. Unlike Calder, who preferred to remain in the shadows, Sienna built her power through visibility and strategy, cultivating a loyal network of street-level operatives who respected her intelligence as much as they feared her ruthlessness. She saw Calder not as a ghost, but as a tangible obstacle, one that could be challenged and eventually toppled. The tension between Calder and Sienna simmered for months, starting with small territorial disputes in Everton and Anfield. Drug deals went missing, street corners were suddenly claimed by unfamiliar crews, and minor skirmishes escalated into violent confrontations. It was a slow-burning war, one that the general public only sensed through a series of unsettling incidents. A car set ablaze on a quiet street. A courier found unconscious near a canal. A small shop burned down in the dead of night. These were not random crimes. They were carefully orchestrated messages, each meant to assert dominance and warn the other side not to overstep. Sienna's approach was deliberate and methodical. She studied Calder's operations, watching for patterns, weaknesses, and moments of vulnerability. Her crews infiltrated corners of the city that had been considered untouchable, blending in with ordinary life while quietly undermining Calder's influence. By establishing control over key routes and distribution points, Sienna began to challenge the perception that Calder was untouchable. The streets were no longer a single chessboard under one king. They were fragmented, with multiple players maneuvering for advantage. The turning point came one autumn night, near the edge of Anfield. A shipment meant for Calder vanished under mysterious circumstances. Weeks later, it was discovered buried in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Neither Calder nor Sienna claimed responsibility publicly, but the message was clear. The war was escalating, and neither side would back down. From that point forward, Liverpool's streets became unpredictable battlegrounds. Drivers transporting narcotics were ambushed in broad daylight. Gang members disappeared only to resurface with threats carved into their skin, and entire neighborhoods were caught in the crossfire. The fear that had long kept the city's residents cautious intensified, creating an atmosphere where no one knew who might be watching or striking next. Sienna's reputation grew with each calculated attack. She earned the nickname Red Fox for her cunning ability to appear where least expected and vanish before authorities could intervene. Her ability to inspire loyalty among her crew was unmatched. She rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal with equal ferocity. Calder, for all his sophistication and international connections, was suddenly facing an enemy who thrived on local knowledge and street-level influence. For the first time, cracks appeared in his carefully maintained empire. The rivalry also attracted attention beyond Liverpool. Law enforcement agencies began to notice the sudden uptick in violent incidents and disappearances. Journalists started piecing together reports of two competing forces, each with distinct styles and motives. While Calder operated like a ghost king, Sienna moved like a predator, swift and intelligent, turning the city's hidden alleys into a lethal playground. The struggle for control became more than a battle over drugs. It was a war for reputation, influence, and survival. By the end of that year, the city had changed irreversibly. Neighborhoods once quiet at night were now filled with tension, residents afraid to leave their homes. Even those not directly involved in the drug trade felt the pressure, learning to recognize the signs of danger, abandoned vehicles, unusual traffic patterns, and whispers of sudden violence. Sienna and Calder had not only altered the criminal landscape, they had rewritten the rules of life in Liverpool, showing that power was no longer just about money, but about fear, strategy, and perception. What began as a slow clash over territory soon escalated into something larger, something that neither side could fully control. The Wraith's empire, once thought untouchable, faced real resistance, and Sienna Morley, with her intelligence and cunning, proved that even in the shadows of Liverpool, a new kind of predator could emerge, one capable of challenging kings, reshaping neighborhoods, and changing the city forever. As the war between Damien Calder and Sienna Morley raged through Liverpool's streets, law enforcement began to uncover a thread that suggested Calder's reach extended far beyond the city. Investigators, piecing together intercepted communications and financial records, discovered links to a cartel operating in Colombia known as Los Llamas Negros. Unlike the more familiar Latin American cartels, Los Llamas Negros specialized in strategic distribution, moving narcotics through complex international networks that relied on ports in Europe to bypass traditional law enforcement checkpoints. Calder, it appeared, had become their northern point of entry. The revelation was a shock. Liverpool, long considered a quiet backwater in terms of organized crime, had become a crucial hub in a global network. Containers arriving at the docks were not only hiding drugs, they were concealing the very lifeblood of Calder's empire. The city's warehouses, shipping yards, and even legal businesses had become nodes in a network that spanned continents. Calder's ability to move cocaine, heroin, and other substances, undetected, had turned Liverpool into a northern stronghold for one of the world's most secretive criminal organizations. But Calder's empire, though cryptic messages intercepted between Calder and Medellin hinted at the scale of operations, revealing financial accounts that flowed through shell companies, offshore banks, and hidden investments. For law enforcement, it became a race against time. Every day Calder and Thorne remained active meant more shipments, more street-level violence, and more opportunities for lives to be destroyed. Yet Calder's downfall was not immediate. The Wraith remained cautious, aware that betrayal could come from anywhere, and that the streets themselves were now a battlefield between him and Sienna Morley. But Thorne's actions created an invisible tension that would soon erupt into violence. He had given Los Llamas Negros the keys to the kingdom without Calder realizing it, and the cartel began to exercise influence over which shipments made it through, quietly siphoning profits while leaving Calder exposed to both legal authorities and rival gangs. By the end of this period, Liverpool had become a city on edge. Every shipment, every neighborhood, every corner carried the potential for betrayal or bloodshed. Calder's empire, once thought untouchable, was being undermined from the inside, while Sienna Morley's influence continued to grow on the streets. The war that had begun as a fight for local control had escalated into an international struggle, where alliances were fragile, loyalty was temporary, and one wrong move could cost lives. In the shadows, the cartel watched, the streets whispered, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would change Liverpool forever. The downfall of Damien the Wraith Calder began quietly, almost imperceptibly, as law enforcement and rival factions waited for the perfect moment to strike. Months of surveillance, tips from insiders, and painstaking analysis of financial and shipping records had created a clear picture of his empire, but the city remained under his shadow. Calder, ever cautious, had managed to stay several steps ahead of the authorities. He knew the docks, the warehouses, and the alleys like the back of his hand, and he had a network of loyal lieutenants who ensured his movements remained invisible. Yet even the most meticulous planning could not anticipate the betrayal brewing within his own ranks. Elias Thorne, once Calder's trusted second-in-command, had become a silent saboteur. By feeding information to Los Llamas Negros and subtly manipulating internal operations, Thorne had weakened Calder's control without exposing himself. Thorne knew that if he acted too openly, Calder would detect the betrayal, and both he and the cartel's leverage would be lost. Instead, he quietly facilitated the interception of shipments, delayed key deals, and created confusion among Calder's associates. The cracks in Calder's empire widened imperceptibly, but they were enough to set in motion a chain of events that would soon shatter everything. The decisive moment came on a rainy night in Birkenhead. Law enforcement, armed with months of evidence and Thorne's insider knowledge, executed a meticulously planned raid on one of Calder's largest warehouses. It wasn't just an arrest. They were after the proof that would dismantle the entire operation. Officers found crates hidden beneath legitimate cargo, each filled with hundreds of kilos of cocaine, stacks of cash, and encrypted ledgers detailing transactions that spanned continents. It was more than a criminal empire. It was a blueprint for global trafficking, now exposed to the authorities for the first time. What shocked the city wasn't only the arrest of Calder, but the extent of the betrayal that had allowed it to happen. Thorne's duplicity had been the key that unlocked Calder's empire. For the first time, Calder's associates realized that the Wraith had vulnerabilities. that loyalty could be exploited, and that even the most formidable figure could fall when trust was broken from within. The streets, once ruled by fear of his name, now sensed a power vacuum, and opportunistic gangs moved quickly to claim what remained. Sienna, Red Fox Morley, seized the moment with precision. She expanded her operations into territories that Calder had once controlled, asserting dominance not through global connections but through street-level power. Her crews, already disciplined and loyal, moved strategically to fill the void, confronting smaller factions and absorbing local networks into her fold. The streets of Everton, Enfield and Vauxhall were no longer a battlefield for two, but a city-wide chessboard of shifting alliances, where survival depended on adaptability, cunning, and brutality. Calder's arrest did not end the violence, it intensified it. Retaliatory strikes, ambushes, and targeted attacks erupted as former associates displaced enforcers and emerging gang leaders all vied for dominance. Families living near the docks and in inner-city neighborhoods faced the consequences firsthand, caught between rival factions seeking to consolidate power. The fear that had long governed daily life in Liverpool now escalated, transforming the city into a place where silence was a survival tactic, and every stranger could be a threat. Despite the chaos, the Wraith's fall was a cautionary tale about the fragility of criminal empires built on fear, secrecy, and absolute control. Calder had been a master strategist, nearly untouchable, and yet the combination of internal betrayal, external pressure, and relentless law enforcement proved fatal. The arrest revealed not only his operations but the mechanisms of loyalty, deception, and strategy that had allowed him to thrive for so long. By the end of this chapter, Liverpool had changed irreversibly. Calder's empire was dismantled, but the consequences rippled across the city. Neighborhoods were divided, criminal networks were restructured, and a new generation of gang leaders watched closely, learning from the Wraith's rise and fall. Sienna Morley solidified her position on the streets, while figures like Elias Thorne and other shadowy operatives quietly plotted their next moves. The fall of the Wraith was not the end of the war, it was merely a turning point, a dramatic shift that left the city poised for the next chapter in its ongoing struggle for control. In the wake of Damien the Wraith, Calder's dramatic fall, Liverpool's streets did not return to normal. Instead, they became a city forever altered, a place where power had shifted and the rules of survival had been rewritten. Sienna Red Fox Morley had solidified her control over the inner-city territories, her influence stretching from Anfield to Everton. But even her growing dominance was met with caution from those who understood that no ruler, no matter how clever, remained unchallenged for long. The void left by Calder's absence created space for a new type of player, one who did not rely on fear alone, but wielded power through subtlety, strategy, and patience. This figure was Cassian Greyhawk Voss. Greyhawk had been an enigma during the Wraith's reign. He operated in the shadows, quietly observing the battles between Calder and Morley, learning which strategies worked, which alliances were fragile, and how the police responded to escalating violence. Unlike Calder, he had no ambition to be a ghost king or a street-level predator. Instead, Greyhawk built influence through discretion, intelligence, and careful manipulation. He infiltrated legal businesses, used technology to monitor shipments, and cultivated a network of informants that reached every corner of the city. Where others relied on guns and intimidation, Greyhawk relied on information. The rise of Greyhawk signaled a new chapter in Liverpool's ongoing struggle with organized crime. Shipments that once moved under Calder's explicit control were now funneled through a labyrinth of shadow operators, each unaware of the bigger picture. Greyhawk ensured that profits flowed smoothly, while minimizing attention from law enforcement. His operations were silent, almost invisible, yet devastatingly effective. Neighborhoods that had been battlegrounds of open violence under Calder now experienced a quieter, more insidious form of control. Fear remained, but it was laced with uncertainty rather than outright terror. Despite the relative calm, the underworld was far from stable. Sienna Morley continued to consolidate her street power, her crews enforcing loyalty with the same mixture of respect and brutality that had defined her rise. Old factions tried to regroup, some seeking revenge for the Wraith's arrest, others hoping to carve out new territories. The delicate balance of power required constant negotiation, subtle maneuvering, and when necessary, swift and lethal action. Even Greyhawk had to be vigilant. One misstep could ignite a conflict that would undo years of careful planning. The city itself bore the scars of this silent war. Abandoned warehouses, once thriving with commerce, remained empty or repurposed for criminal activity. Families continued to live under the shadow of threat, wary of the people and businesses around them. Young people were still drawn into the allure of power and money, some aspiring to emulate Calder or Morley, others tempted by the efficiency and subtlety of Greyhawk's operations. The city's landscape, both physical and social, had been permanently reshaped. Liverpool was no longer just a port city, it was a battleground, where visibility and invisibility, violence and manipulation competed for supremacy. Greyhawk's emergence highlighted a dangerous truth. The city's criminal networks were resilient, capable of evolving even after the most dramatic takedowns. The war for control had shifted from overt confrontations to a game of shadows, where information, influence, and strategy were more powerful than brute force. Yet, as subtle as this new era was, the stakes remained high. Lives could still be destroyed in a single night, reputations could be ruined in a whisper, and alliances could collapse with devastating speed. In many ways, Liverpool had become a city defined by its criminal underworld. The lessons of the past, Calder's ambition, Morley's street dominance, Thorne's betrayal served as cautionary tales for those who sought power. Greyhawk's rise represented the next phase of that struggle, a reminder that even in silence, influence could be absolute. As night fell over the city, the docks glimmered under the faint glow of streetlights. Alleys remained shadowed, and warehouses sat empty but vigilant. Liverpool had changed forever, caught in an unending cycle of ambition, betrayal, and survival. The war for control was far from over. It had simply become invisible to the casual observer, a silent force chasing the city from within. And in the shadows, Greyhawk watched, waited, and planned, proving that even in the absence of open violence, the battle for Liverpool's soul was still very much